Morning, everyone. Happy game day to you. This is Ezekiel Trezevan, Las Vegas Raiders on SI co-beat writer Ezekiel Trezevan. Thank you guys, as always, for joining me. Obviously, week 4, Chicago Bears. Man, we have a lot to talk about. We have a lot to talk about. Obviously, last time I joined you guys, it was in regards to the last game, the Commanders game, week 3. And a lot of unexpected things happened in that game, and most of them were not positive. There's really no way of dressing up what happened in terms of week 3 against the Commanders. But first and foremost, like Pete has done all week, or Pete did all week. He basically gave credit to the Commanders, so you have to start there. The other team did a great job of what they went out there, what they wanted to do, basically, right? They game planned well, they executed well, and the same, unfortunately, cannot be said about the Raiders. One thing that is important to keep in mind with the Raiders and the Commanders game, and Pete pointed this out, and there's making excuses, and then there's just legitimate truths, and it's the fact that the Commanders had about a 10-day break between their last game before they played the Raiders. So they had been off for some time. They had a chance to rest, recover. Not only did they have that 10-day break, I believe their last game was September 11th, and then their next game against the Raiders was the 21st, if I'm not mistaken. And then they played at home, so there was no need to travel. So they had almost 2 weeks off. I mean, that's a mini bye week, especially when you consider that the Raiders played on Monday night. So not only did the Commanders have a long layover, right? They had a decent amount of time off, especially for the first month of the season. They basically had a week and a half off just on their own. And then when you consider the fact that the Raiders played on Monday night and not Sunday, well, that's a day less of training there, or a day less of preparation there, on top of the week and a half that the Commanders were already resting, recovering, and game planning for the Raiders. And then obviously the Raiders also had to travel, and I mean, no matter how you slice it up, traveling across the country, different time zones, that's bound to make an impact. But yes, any football team that has a week and a half to recover, and they're playing a team that has had 4 days to recover and had to travel, there's a competitive advantage there. I don't think that's making excuses. I think that would be the case regardless of if it was the Raiders, whether it's the Commanders, any team. I think if you put any team name on there, that's a hell of an advantage. I really believe that, and I don't think it's unfair to point that out again, regardless of what team. But with that said, right, we can give Washington credit. We can give their coaching staff credit for what they did. We can give the players on Washington's team credit for performing and for executing well, even with their backup quarterback in. That takes great preparation by the players and the coaches. We can give them all the credit in the world. They deserve it. They earned it. But flat out, the Raiders have to get better at a lot of different things. And I think if there's any positive that you can take, and it's hard to find some positive from a 20-point loss, that you battled for a little bit, but momentum was really never on your side at any point in the game. You struggled really from the start. After the kickoff went as many yards as it did, the opening kickoff at that, it was just it kind of went downhill from there. Whenever things go that bad, you have a lot of things to work on. I think that is the positive, is the fact that hey, there's no secret there. You have no shortage of things to work on. Back to the game in terms of Washington. The unfortunate part of that game was that the Raiders had a catastrophic breakdown uh, in every facet of the game, one way or the other. Whether it was allowing Gino to get sacked and pressured as many times as he did, whether it was the defense giving up the long run for a touchdown. I mean, that is completely uncharacteristic of the Raiders defense this season. Heading into that Commanders game, they were top, I want to say, 5 in the league in terms of rushing yards allowed. Obviously, after that Washington game, they've fallen down quite a bit. But heading into that game, that was the strength of the defense. And I still think it's the strength of the defense. I think that one play skewed the numbers. And obviously, with only 3 games worth of stats, it's easy to kind of fluctuate where you fall in terms of rankings. It's still early in the season. So I think the Raiders are going to tune that up, this week against the Bears. They have to. The Raiders are such a young team, a new team. There's so many different new parts. They don't have the room for error to not be strong where they're supposed to be strong at. And on the defense, that is their defensive line. That is their run game. Heading into the season, again, I think the cool thing about the Raiders is that they are what we've thought they were going to be, right? Outside of the injuries that have happened, and outside of those two things, right? In terms of the injuries, Brock Bowers and JPJ, those are 2 huge injuries that have impacted them. I think outside of those two things, they've largely been on offense and on defense what we all would have expected after watching them in training camp. what that was for the defense was a defense that could stop the run, especially in the up the interior, right? That was something that was I've said it. I want to say before the first game of the season. I'm so confident in the Raiders' run defense, especially in the interior, that if you are able to run in that area, the Raiders are in trouble. That's how confident I am that that is their strength, and that's what happened against Washington. The place that was supposed to be strong for them, their run defense, it failed them, right? Because we all knew it's going to be they need to pressure the quarterback with the defensive line. They have to stop the run with the defensive line and hope for the best on the back end with their young defensive backfield. Well, if they're unable to stop the run and they can't stop the pass, it's a free for all at that point, and that's what happened against Washington. So I think they have to do a better job. I think they will do a better job at stopping the run for the Raiders defense. It all starts and ends there, stopping the run and pressuring the quarterback. Potentially getting sacks in there. So I think that's important. I think another thing that is important to look at in terms of the Washington game, it was just the flat out similarities between week 2 and week 3 in terms of just vibe and momentum. And some people don't believe in that, but I do. I do believe momentum is a real thing, especially in football, especially with a team that's building, with a team that's trying to find its identity. For the second straight week, the Raiders did two things that I just feel like it's. I mean, come on, you started 2 games in a row with huge plays towards the other team, right? Against the Chargers, you threw an interception on the very first play of the game. Yes, you have the entire game to recover, but you just turned the ball over on the very first play of the game. That is a momentum killer. I think at that point it starts to get mental, right? And I think against the Chargers, it kind of they brushed it off. I really do think they brushed off that, that completely unlucky interception that they started the game with. But I think in Washington, when they gave up that kickoff return for I believe 60 or 70 yards, I believe off the top of my head, don't quote me. But I think when they gave that up, it was almost a oh no, here we go again. No team is above that, especially a team that has so many new parts as the Raiders. But that's one of the things that they did for the second consecutive week in terms of the Chargers and the Commanders. Another thing they did was, if you notice, they gave up a score right before halftime. So think about it. You gave up a big play that leads to a touchdown. In Washington, I think they scored 5 plays later after the kickoff return. I think against the Chargers, they scored 4 or 5 plays later as well. So you gave up a big play that leads to a touchdown to start the game, and then you give up another score right before halftime. That's 2 possessions right there that you just gave to the other team. They are not good enough to overcome giving the other team the ball and letting them score. They're not good enough for that yet. And few teams in the league are. That's why the turnover battle is so huge. Very few teams can turn the ball over multiple times, or give the other team the ball in great field position X amount of times a game and expect to win. Few teams in the National Football League can do that. The Raiders are not one of them. So again, you cannot, in terms of the Bears, you cannot start for a third week in a row with a bad play to start the game, especially not at home for a second time in a row. Cannot do that. As cliche as it is in terms of getting off to a fast start, we know they need to get off to a fast start against the Bears. However, I would challenge them to just not get off to a bad one. They need to get off to a good start. We know that. But even if they don't, just don't get off to a bad start. Don't get off to a start where you're giving the ball to the other team, or you're giving up a 70-yard kickoff return. Like, help yourself out. And I know just from kind of being around the locker room and us interviewing and talking to Pete, that it doesn't matter who the coach is. It doesn't matter who the quarterback is, or who the running back is, or who the offensive line is. If you are giving the ball to the other team, you are going to lose the game. Like, you cannot beat yourself. I know that's a frustration that Pete has had. He's been gracious in terms of speaking to it, but it's as frustrating as the offensive line has been. So has been the fact that they are giving the other team either the ball in general, they're turning it over, or they're giving the other team great momentum to start the game and going into half. Right, you're handing them two basically free possessions. I will start with Chicago in terms of this third game. Momentum is real. If we could talk about that for a quick second, there is some symmetry. There are some similarities between this Raiders team. There are still remaining parts from other regimes from the last 2, 3 years. And so when things get off to a bad start, there is a mental aspect that you have to worry about, especially as the losses rack up. So they're only 1-2. But if things start to go south against the Bears, you have to really start to dig in and start to wonder how things get mentally. Now, I do think that is part of why Pete Carroll was brought in. Pete has turned around multiple teams professionally and obviously on the college level as well, turned around a big time franchise on both the college and the professional level. If there's anyone who can deal with the good and the bad and the ugly of turning around a team and a franchise, it's Pete Carroll. And that's part of the job, right? Whenever you're turning things around, it's not going to get better overnight, usually. That's usually not how it goes in the National Football League. If anybody understands that, it's Pete Carroll. So it's going to be interesting to see how they handle Chicago. Obviously, it's still early, right? It's game 4 out of the 17 games you're playing. Even if you do fall to 1-3, is it getting kind of to that danger zone? Very much so, because at 1-4, you got to be realistic about where your chances are for that season to be productive. But if you beat the Chicago Bears, you get to 2-2, and you kind of see where things go from there. You're still a chance to make what you will of it. Another thing to keep in mind about the Raiders being 1-2 heading into this game is that much of the AFC West has a similar or the same record outside of the Chargers, I believe, who are still undefeated. So they're not out of the race, right? Things can still flip. It's still things that can go in their favor. It's only really just a matter of how they do game by game, and they have to go out there and win maybe a game or two that they were not expected to win. In terms of Chicago, I mean, I think I see a lot of similarities between them and in terms of their offensive makeup in the Commanders. So I think you got to worry about the mobile quarterback. Now, Ben Johnson is your X factor. Obviously, you know the somewhat of the connection in terms of Ben Johnson interviewing with the Raiders, but Ben Johnson is a very well respected offensive play caller, and he's going to have his guys ready. Have that offense ready. Chicago's coming off, I believe, their first win of the season, and they're ready for a second consecutive one. So the Raiders are definitely going to have to be ready, but I really think a lot of it's going to be about what the Raiders do. A lot of this is them self-scouting themselves, and back to that's where the Washington game comes into play, right? I said it earlier. I think the only positive or the main positive is that there were so many things that went wrong. They have no choice but to go work on everything. And I think if they go work on themselves and work on everything, they will be in a much better position than they were in the last 2 weeks. Which brings me to the point of Jackson Powers Johnson, and it's a hot topic of debate in terms of JPJ and what's going on and why he didn't play against the Commanders. A lot of speculation, a lot of thoughts, and we'll see, right? If I want to say if, but he has to be in the lineup against the Chicago Bears. There's no way you can not play him. I'm sure he may or may not be 100%. I don't know that, but you have to play him. He was ready to go by Pete's words. He was ready to go against the Commanders, and he wasn't out there. Now we've seen the last 2 weeks what this offensive line looks like without him. There's only so much flexibility they have in terms of moves they can make on the offensive line that can help. Putting your starting guard back in there is one of those two options. He has to be in there. I think that is very simple to understand. I don't think anyone can disagree that you at least have to get JPJ back out there. He's been arguably the biggest missing piece of the offense for the last 2 games. Now, that's not to say that they won't have issues even with JPJ in there. Pressure still got home against the Raiders week 1, even with JPJ in there. So it's not as if he's going to fix everything, but he's going to fix, I would imagine, a decent amount of those problems that they've been having without him out there. I mean, the offensive line looked better with him in week 1 than they have without him in weeks 2 and 3. So they had to figure that out. They also, Pete has made it clear, and Chip also made it clear that they're not going to move JPJ to center. So I think there's only one or two there's only two moves that they can really make to help the offensive line, other than trading for another offensive lineman before the trade deadline, which they may need to consider. That's really there's only really 2 or 3 choices they have. It's going to be put JPJ back in there, move him to center, which they are apparently adamant that they're not going to do. Or number 3, you got to go add an offensive lineman, maybe 2. At the end of the day, those are really your options. If adding JPJ into the offensive line again, where he belongs as a starter, does not work, and moving him to center is something that they're not going to do, the trade deadline is November 4th. So you got to make a move, because at the end of the day, 3 weeks in, 4 weeks in, it's no secret how you beat the Raiders offense. And the whole league is watched. The Washington Commanders, all they did was in terms of defensively, a carbon copy basically of what the Chargers did. And the next team is going to do it, and the next team is going to do it. So the Raiders have to essentially figure it out. That's why you made Chip Kelly the highest paid offensive coordinator in the National Football League. And so that he could figure out how to work this thing with what you have. That's part of this too, right? Part of this beautiful game, especially on the professional level, is making it work with what you have. The Raiders have to do that. Now, the good news about the Bears, in terms of their defense, is that they have the potential to be great, especially if the Raiders' offensive line is not up to par on Sunday. But going into the game, the Bears' defense, they have allowed, I believe, the fourth most total yards per game through the first 3 weeks of the season. I mean, that's good news for any team that they're playing. And then I believe they have allowed some of the most rushing yards in terms of rushing yards allowed per game for defenses in the league as well. So that should bode well for the Raiders. But again, you kind of have to throw all stats and thoughts and ideas out the window if the Raiders' offensive line is not blocking somewhat adequately. It doesn't have to be great. It just cannot be so. It can't be what it's been. It just can't be what it's been. I don't want to say bad. I don't want to harp, but it, everybody knows the game is won in the trenches. And if your offensive line is listen, individually, there's a lot of talent on the offensive line. Those guys individually, a lot of them are great. Most of them are great. But as a unit, there's no denying what's been seen the first 3 weeks of the season. Now, the next part of that conversation is it the talent or is it the coaching? That is that is debatable, depending on who you ask. And if you ask me, I think it's a mixture of both. There's no way it's not a mixture of the coaching and the guys that are on the field. So again, something else that the Raiders have to figure out. In general, I think it has to be said that the offensive line, in terms of where they are and how much they have struggled, their struggles are big enough to derail the entire season. I think their other weaknesses on the team aren't necessarily as dire. Okay, the cornerbacks could use some help. They could use some help, a couple of different places. But I don't think any other position group has played as poorly, and I don't think there's any other position group as vital to their success, to any team's success, as the offensive line. Again, they don't have to be, top five offensive linemen across the board, but you also can't be among the worst in the league. And I don't know any statistics that can confirm whether they are or not, but just pure eye test. Come on. I mean, Ashton Genty's getting touched. He's getting hit as soon as I mean, there's time. I mean, come on, you guys see it. You guys see it. It's hard to watch sometimes. It's known that offensive line was an issue. So I don't think it's irresponsible to point that out, that it's still an issue. If you remember, right before this draft, it was speculated that they might be drafting an offensive tackle. So it's not out of and even the draft, 2 off seasons ago, when they drafted Brock Bowers, they were speculated to be interested in maybe an offensive tackle or offensive lineman. So it's not crazy that they are where they are in terms of needing help at offensive line. So a lot of things the Raiders still have to do, a lot of things they have to figure out. But I think overall, everyone just has to remember this is a project, right? No one expected them to come in and turn things around immediately. And that's if everything did go well. That's if JPJ never got hurt. That's if Brock never got hurt. That's if the things that have gone wrong didn't go wrong. We still all figured it would take time. And that was just looking at things realistically. And I think this is also in terms of, a 2-game losing streak and watching our frustrations that have been out there for the coaches and the players. This is part of growth. I think that we would all like to start over and go straight to the top and watch these guys win 12 games, but that's not realistic. That's not how growth works. This is part of growth. There's some growing pains, and I think that's what we're witnessing with the Raiders. Now they need a little bit of luck to go in their favor. It hasn't been there so far, but it's still early. We'll see where they go, and we just hope that they turn things around. It's not impossible. But they're going to have to figure it out. They're going to have to overcome some adversity. They're going to have to get creative with what they do on that offensive line, slash with how they block. Right? It might be running more 2 tight end sets. It might be adding more of a lead blocker for Genty. Maybe throw Zamir in there as a lead blocker for Genty and kind of see what goes in there. Get creative. Throw Tasi in there as it's Chip Kelly, man. He's got plenty of ideas in that head of his that I could only imagine. The kinds of things he has in his head. So Chip, get creative, man, do your thing, work your magic. But these guys are going to go as the offensive line allows them to go. Because if the offensive line is not holding up, offensive drives are going to be short. They're going to be punting the ball right back to the opposing team. And it's going to be a lot of what we saw in weeks 2 and week 3. And, tack onto that what we saw last season. So the Raiders have to figure things out. They have to grab this bull by the horns while they still can, because as much as it's still early in the season, there's only so long that you can say it's early in the season, right? There's only so many losses that can pile up before you say it's still early in the season. So they have to figure it out. I believe they have the coaching staff that can and that will. But at the same time, football has to be the number one thing on everybody's mind. So I'll leave it at that. With that, as always, guys, thank you for joining me. Las Vegas Raiders on SI co-beat writer Ezekiel Trezevant. It was a pleasure. Keep sticking with me, guys. I hope I get better every week. It's a pleasure. Y'all have a good one.